Welcome to another episode of Rights for Women. Today, I'm really excited about the guest who is joining me on the Convo Couch. As many listeners will know, many regular listeners, I am part of a fabulous writing group called the Inkwell. Previously to being called the Inkwell, it was actually called the Writer's Dozen, and we started out in around 2004, so that was almost 20 years ago, scarily. And it was a group of 13 writers, hence the Writer's Dozen, who decided that after a year-long course at Writing New South Wales, then the New South Wales Writers Centre, we wanted to continue meeting, and we met fortnightly. And over the years, people dropped off, people stopped writing or went back to full-time work. But every second Wednesday, a bunch of us would meet at Writing New South Wales and workshop our novels, support each other, do what writing groups do. Now, over the years, as I said, people left and numbers dwindled, and we invited a whole bunch of new people in and decided to give the group a new name for the new membership. But one of the very original members of that group, along with me and a few other people, was Terri Green. So I am so excited to have Terri Green on the Rights for Women Convo Couch today, because Terri is someone who has just hung in there and continued writing and just continued building her confidence, her craft, her skills, just trying a hand at all sorts of different genres, which we're going to talk about today, and has, for the time being, settled on historical fiction. But before we get into chatting about kind of staying in it for the long haul, which is really what I want to talk to Terri about today, amongst other things, let me tell you a little bit about Terri Green. So like most writers, Terri was one of those kids with her nose perpetually stuck in a book. A lot of us can relate to that, I think. She wanted to be a children's author when she grew up for a very long time, but she wanted to be a children's author when she grew up, but detoured into physiotherapy instead, and writing was put on the back burner for a long time. It was a winding and convoluted path that finally led her to be a writer of historical fiction. Along the way, Terri collected a few short story prizes and a PhD, just a little PhD, in creative writing, otherwise known, in Terri's words, as a doctorate in making things up. I think you'll start to get the vibe from Terri's bio that she's actually quite the hoot. It wasn't until Terri spent 3 months in the UK on a writer's residency, became a Shakespearean era theatre groupie, and learnt how to wield a sword, that she made a foray into historical fiction. In 2022, Terri released not one, but 2 novels in the Sisters of the Sword series, The Swordmaster's Daughter and An Unsuitable Pursuit. Both are set in the early 17th century, filled with feisty women, men in tights, and plenty of swordplay. And yes, there is a double entendre there. There's also a dash of romance, generous lashings of intrigue, and a whole lot of girl power going on. And there will be a 3rd instalment very soon. Terri, as I said, is a long-term member of the same writing group as myself, now called the Inkwell, previously the Writer's Dozen. And when she's not writing or doing things to other people's bodies, in a purely professional way, of course, you might find her fencing, hula hooping, or eating dark chocolate, or playing with her gorgeous dog, Mabel, or perhaps riding her electric scooter. Terri has a fabulous newsletter too, which you can sign up to, and I'll put the link for that in the show notes. But now it is my absolute pleasure to have Terri Green on the Rights for Women podcast. Okay, Terri Green, welcome to the Rights for Women Convo Couch.
Thank you very much for having me.
I've just done the intro, and I've let all the listeners know about our connection through first the Writer's Dozen and now the Inkwell, and about your long-term career in writing and your genre hopping, shall we say?
Yes, I use a ruder word, but
that's right. We may mention that word during the course of this interview. But Terri, before we get on to talking about your fabulous historicals, which are out now, can you just run us through what you would say is your path to publication?
history or pathway?
Oh, good question. I guess a bit of both.
Okay, I'll try and do a potted history because it's rather long. I never do anything the easy way. So, look, probably, like, I always wanted to write, like a lot of writers, but as a kid, I wasn't one of those ones that wrote lots of stories, but I just read. And then thought about doing journalism or English and history at uni, but came from quite a really pretty working class background, really, with middle class aspirations. And so I wasn't encouraged to do that. I was encouraged to get a job, do a course where you could get a job. And I was the first person in my family to ever get a degree. So, but it had to be practical. So I did physio instead. But that was always there that I think you just have that urge within you. And then babies, families, dramas, all that stuff got somewhat in the way. And then I really got back into it as a way out of grief, basically, which is a bit unusual because my eldest died just after her 13th birthday, 4 weeks after her 13th birthday. And writing was like grief counsel to tell you to write. So I started writing poems and I sent them away and they got published. So I thought, oh, okay, I might be able to do this. So then I had this idea of a movie in my head. So then I did a course on screenwriting and I wrote a screenplay, as you do. And I had a director and producer interested in it. But when I looked at them, I thought, they didn't have that much of a track record. They were more kind of indie. And I got too busy and I just shelved it. Because I'd also found out that most movie screenplays are more likely to be adaptations of a novel, certainly in Australia. So then I thought, okay, I'll write a novel.
Why not?
But in the meantime, this is a bit weird. I randomly saw a psychic. I was out with my husband having lunch and there's a psychic at the cafe. So I said, oh, I can go and see them.
Sorry, just repeat that, Terri. You saw a psychic.
Yes.
Okay, just to clarify. Yep.
I told you it's a weird pathway to writing. And I had my daughter's ring on, and she was a psychic who used items, could be jewelry, I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, I gave her a ring, no information, never met that woman before in my life. And she came out with my daughter's name within about 2 minutes. And that was the name her friends called her, because her name was Jennifer. So she kept saying, I'm seeing this girl, I'm getting Jenny, and said, oh my gosh. Yeah. So that's when I thought, oh, I better pay attention to this woman because I'm a little bit of a skeptic, but I'm open to things. And then she told me a few things about family, which did eventuate. And then she just kept repeating, you must write, you must write.
Oh, wow. I did not know this about you, Terri. I've known you for nearly 20 years. I didn't know you wrote a screenplay and I didn't know about this.
I didn't know. It was in the fates. So around that, I had these two ideas. And the other thing she also told me was, oh, you've got like a really strong sense of humor and you're good at making people laugh. And I was thinking about this novel, more serious novel based on the screenplay, or this crazy, silly idea. And that was when I met you, because we did the first draft, page to first draft course.
That's right.
At the New South Wales Writers' Centre, because I've been doing courses at the Writers' Centre. But I wasn't writing a novel. I was writing a how-to manual called How to Train a Man based on dog training principles.
I remember it was so funny. I loved it.
I know, but look, not very PC. But people have read it, and I had it professionally edited, and the editor said, actually, this is not really good advice for like people. And then, just as I was starting to query it in the vague hope someone would take it up, a show came out in the UK with a woman who was a dog trainer helping couples with their problems using dog training principles. There goes that.
Of course
idea.
It did, yeah.
Plan B. So then I wrote a kid's book, and because it was driving back from our writing meetings, and this idea just logged in my head. This kid's book, and the characters really fully formed. So then I wrote that, and then I also at the time I thought I just needed a bit more guidance. So I enrolled I was tossing up career-wise between a postgrad certificate in occupational health and safety, would have paid my money, or certificate in creative writing. So guess what I chose? Creative writing. And they really liked the kids' book, and it got into a development with a publisher, and then the GFC hit. Nothing got published. Nothing happened. So next plan, I thought, my uni supervisor was really encouraging me to do a master's. I had an idea for a young adult book. So I enrolled in the master's and wrote a young adult book, which took me 6 years to write. But that was because it messed with my head. It turned into a PhD, and I don't think anyone remember it. But anyway, should I tell you?
And can I just interrupt and tell everybody listening out there, it is absolutely fantastic. I've read it, and you have to get that out in the world somehow, someday, Terri.
As I said to every publisher, it has a disability theme because I'm a physio, so I like writing about redemption and recovery. Basically, that's my thing, recovery. Getting through the hard times, getting to a better place. It just didn't get up, but it's a very Australian story, so I knew it wasn't going to get up overseas. So that's my one big weep cry. Why? I don't know why, but it didn't. It's a business. If people don't think they can market it, it's not going to get up. But I did briefly put it online, but I may publish that at some point. But it kind of broke my heart a bit. And then I wrote this other young adult book, which in hindsight probably isn't young adult. I probably should have written it as an adult because it's a bit too controversial. And that was about surrogacy. And that's when I'm thinking, God, I don't know what I'm doing. But I finished the PhD. So I'm Dr. Terri.
Yes, Dr. Terri Green. I should have introduced you as that, actually. Sorry, Terri, that was my bad.
I don't tend to use it in my other career because it's a bit confusing for people, because then they think I am the doctor, but I'm not the doctor.
True.
Yeah. So,
and you also did, I don't know if you were going to mention this, but you also did a writer's residency in the UK.
I'm coming to that. Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes. In the meantime, I also was trying out romance, and I wrote like a kind of really raunchy romance before it became a thing. At the same time, I was writing kids' book, which was a little awkward. But anyway, then I had this idea for there was a residency in the UK, and it had to be set in the UK. So I was coming up with young adult ideas set of UK. And in the meantime, my husband and I had gone on a trip to England, and driving along, I just heard this story about boys that were kidnapped in Shakespeare's time to perform in the theatre. And I thought, oh, wow, that's amazing. I've never heard that story. And that was the germ of the idea. Came back to my writing group, who are the sounding board of all, and I said, I've got this contemporary idea or this young historical idea. Which one should I put in application? And you all said historical. So I said, okay. So I cobbled together this proposal, and you had to say what you were going to do. And I looked up, because I'd done the PhD, I found out I could get into the archives of the Globe and Shakespeare's Trust, which was amazing. So that sort of gave me an in there. So I had a little bit of academic credit, and I got the residency. And my family were big enough and ugly enough that they didn't need me around all the time. And my husband's a really good cook. So for 3 months I went, bye. And went and tried to write this novel. But basically I researched it and sat there on my own pulling my hair out. But anyway, I did eventually write that novel. And then that novel is sitting in a drawer. But I have used that novel to now launch the series that I'm writing now. So that's about it.
Yes, and just in case anyone was interested, the word we were going to, I have to use the phrase because, Terri, everything you have just said demonstrates that you are a genre slut. And there's just no two ways about it.
I know, totally. But the problem,
and proud of that.
Yes, proud of my spreading it around. But it's not a great career move. This is the problem, because I felt like they were all like good, and they got into residency. I won a few prizes along the way, and I won a Commonwealth Short Story regional prize, and so I had that reinforcement that, as the psychic told me, you must write, and then the affirmation that I can write. Then I just had to learn to write something that was a bit more commercial, and which I have done, but I knew it wasn't great for this market in Australia.
Yeah, we'll get on to that.
Yeah. So that's a potted history of my weird straight.
The potted history, and I love it. And the reason I love it, and I mentioned this in the introduction, Terri, is that you've really stayed in it for the long haul. As anybody out there who has written novels or is working on a novel or is anything to do with the publishing industry knows, it is a really difficult industry to break into. It's difficult to stay in, and it can be very disconcerting and disappointing and discouraging to send off submissions and queries and all that sort of thing, which I know that you have done lots of over the years, but you've never let it know that there have been disappointments too. And I'm sure that there have been many times where you've just thought, oh, bugger this, why am I doing this? But you've never let it deter you. You've kept going. And I just love that about you.
I'm stubborn. I think you have to be a writer in a positive way. If you're stubborn and won't accept what people are telling you that maybe you should do or giving you good advice, that's not a good stubborn. People that won't change their work or don't want to evolve. But you do have to be stubborn in that to keep at it, or you would just give up.
Yeah, definitely. Were there particular things along the way, Terri, that sort of kept encouraging you, like that kept you thinking, yes, I'm just going to keep going, I'm just going to keep going? Were there certain things when you think back that did give you that encouragement?
Yes, and it's a mixed blessing, because I felt like I was the mouse, just giving me, like, you're allowed to have a little bit of nibble of the cheese, but you were never getting the whole cheese. So that intermittent reinforcement, like, that just made me want to do it all the more, I think, because I got close a few times to publication. Editors would want the whole manuscript and they'd like it, and they'd be got to being considered and everything, and then you get back, no, we don't think we can market this, or no, whatever. But I think the hardest part, it was my young adult. That was the one time I thought, oh, look, I don't know what else I can do, because people that had read it, that know literature and books, said this is really good. And like you as a teacher said, this would make an amazing HSC book. But,
absolutely.
But industry said no.
Yeah, and look, I think that's absolute proof that if anybody ever needed it, that it doesn't, the fact that you don't get published with a certain book is not reflective of the quality necessarily of the book or the manuscript. It can be, there's so many different factors from, as you say, like we mentioned the GFC, it can be timing with what's going on in publishing. It can be just whether it fits a particular niche. It can be whether another book has recently come out that's in that vein, it's similar, that can put a publisher off. So there's so many different reasons why your book might not get accepted, that might not have anything to do with the actual quality.
Yeah, and that could be really discouraging for a writer. But having a writing group was the thing that really kept me going, because I trusted your opinion, and because you're all really good writers, and I was getting editors and external editors at different points too, and they were saying, no, it's not the writing, it's just luck, market, timing, keep at it.
Yeah.
So,
which you did.
Which I did, yeah, in a different way, yeah.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more about being in a writing group and how that's helped you? Because I know there are some, as we all know, writing can be quite a lonely pursuit. And there are some writers who prefer that. They like to just keep their work to themselves, not necessarily have that collegiate type of work process, I guess, not really get feedback. But how have you found that experience of being in a writing group, particularly over that long time?
I found it was probably the thing that kept me going. And partly too, I think when there's a group of you, like because we share information, you learn a lot from each other and different areas, and we're all different genres that we write in, which I think can be healthy. So you're focusing more on the craft rather than the genre, obviously. But with a group, you have someone who's in a down while someone's in an up. So the energy is rarely all down. So when you're down, the people that are up help to lift you. And when you're up, you'll help bringing them up. So I think that group dynamic, if you were in a group where everyone was really critical and miserable, then you would leave. But I think we always had that cycle, and we laugh and whinge and complain about the nature of publishing.
That's right. We have to do that. We have to vent, don't we? And we celebrate each other's wins, and we are there to commiserate with the losses or the rejections or whatever.
And other people's wins can feel like your win too, especially if you maybe gave some feedback at the start of the book, or someone was struggling, and then with a bit of help, they saw it through to the finished product. So I think it's just that group dynamic. But you've got to have a group that's open and caring and mindful of people's feelings, but not being too nice in terms of the work. Nice in terms of how you treat people, but a critical eye when you're looking at the work.
Yeah. And the other great thing too, isn't it, is that everybody brings a different skill set to the group. Like, for instance, Terri, you are queen of the blurb. Whenever we need a blurb done, it's definitely, Terri, get onto this.
Yeah, it's weird. I can do other people's. It's hard to do your own. But yeah, I think that might be just my physio background, because I'm having to condense a lot of complex information into a simple form.
True.
When I'm talking to people all the time. Maybe, I don't know.
Whatever. You're very good at it. So we all appreciate that. So as you mentioned, you got into the historical fiction after the residency, and you do have another novel in the drawer, which featured one of the characters, a few really, but definitely one of the characters, and gave you the spark of the idea for what has become a series, The Sisters of the Sword. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how, you, even though that one is in the drawer, how that has then sparked off this whole other idea? And I guess Lucinda we really need to talk about, because she is the protagonist of my mum is ringing, so I'm just going to keep turning the thing off. Sorry, Terry. I'll ring her later. Sorry. Yes, let's talk about Lucinda, because she is the most fantastic protagonist. She did come from that original manuscript, and now she has a whole story and a whole world of her own. So tell us about Lucinda.
Okay, so Lucinda in the book was in the drawer because in theatre they used to do a lot of sword fighting on stage. And as this boy who was kidnapped at the theatre, he decides he actually wants to stay and learn. So he organises for himself to have lessons at a fencing academy with a master swordsman who's called a swordmaster. And he has a daughter called Lucinda. She had a twin brother who died, and that's her big thing, that she actually thinks that the boy should have lived and she feels like. And so she's always trying to be that boy. She's trying to be that replacement boy to her father growing up. And she teaches Nathan how to sword fight, and she was just such a great character. I just loved her.
She was fabulous. She is fabulous.
Yeah, she's just really feisty, and like her says what she thinks, probably too much, especially for a woman of the era. But she gets older and wiser, and she was just, because she's such a great character, I just thought she was just like, she's sitting here saying, tell my story, tell my story. So I said, okay, I will. And I just really had this idea that when she realises that she can't keep sword fighting with the men or pretending to be a man, that's just not going to happen. But she's a woman, she's got to take on all this. And she also is grandma's midwife, and she's training her to be a midwife. She's being pulled more into the female world, but she loves fencing. So she sets up, by a series, one or two coincidences, but not too many, can't have too many of them, this group of women who need to know how to defend themselves, because either they move in dubious circles, but some of them have been sexually assaulted. So she is teaching them how to defend themselves. And they call themselves the Sisters of the Sword, not in a rude way.
Correct.
Yes, because some people point out, did you? I said, yes, I know, but it's not. Context is all. There's a tiny bit of that sort of way going, but not a lot. So, yeah. So now she's gathered this group, and it's turned into this bit of mystery, bit of action, adventure, bit of romance. But that's what I like about historical, because it can be everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Other genres are much more defined in some ways, but historical, you can have a whole lot of different elements. So, which I think suits my personality.
Definitely. So Lucinda came from that original story, which, as you say, is in a drawer for now. And you've drawn on a lot of the things that you found in the research that you started on that residency. But as you say, you've added this additional layer of, it's very pro-women, feminist. That's the word I'm looking for. You've added this kind of feminist layer to it. And that's not to say that there weren't feminists back in that day, but you've definitely got a modern perspective looking back on that historical time period. How did you go about blending the historical fact and then knowing how far to then take the fictional elements of your story that you then wanted to insert into that time period?
It's just a judgment call. And the interesting with historical is, like, you can't use words of the era. Even if you use one or two, they stick out. Can I say that?
Yes, you can.
Stick out like dog's balls.
Yes.
Yeah, so you can like have the odd one or two in context. Like, instead of saying pregnant, I'll say with child. Yeah, because that's what they would have said. Yeah. But I am also very careful that I've used a couple of actual real people in it. So I've taken some of the elements of their life, and you sort of have to stick to the timeline of what happens in that year. So I look at, okay, what happened in that year? And the second book, was the gunpowder plot. So I thought, okay, oh. So now I read up all on the gunpowder plot and knew what happened. And then I thought, I'm going to insert a woman in there. And there's different ways I could have done it. But in the end, I had a sort of sidelining to the plot. Yeah, but I'm kind of rewriting history, which you are. And that's the fun bit. But if it's what I found in the first book was I had too many real characters. I was trying to stick to the history too much. And then you lose your plot. You can lose, like, it's a series of events and it can be a bit episodic rather than having the, shape of a plot.
Yeah.
So what if you read any historical, what you notice is, unless they're doing kings and queens and they've been done to death, and I'm more interested in ordinary people, then it's often better to have a known event or some of the side characters as real people, but your main characters as fictional renditions, because then you can play. And I think they've always been feminists, because by feminists I mean it's just people that think that men and women should have equal respect.
Yes.
And then the opportunities were a lot more limited, but in some ways women were more respected then. But in a very narrow sense.
Yeah, they had to operate within the confines of that society, didn't they?
Men, like, people stay single for very long once they married and had kids. If they lost their husband, if they or wife, they would marry again pretty quickly, especially men, because they needed a woman to run the household, because men didn't know how to do it, because work was, it's a lot of work, so things were much more compartmentalized by gender. But there's little tantalizing references in history to women that did sword fight, and I thought, I'm sure there were girls that are out, like my sister was like that. She was always out playing with the boys and kicking a ball, and girls weren't allowed to play soccer then. So I think there's always girls that are attracted to that. I think because people. Yeah,
and there's always been women that push the boundaries regardless of what time period they grew up in. So let's get on to the sword fighting, because as part of your research for the book, you yourself took up sword fighting.
Yeah, they're like big, strong men. Yeah, I started out doing standard fencing, which I really liked when I was in England, because I found there was a fencing club there, and it was a good way to get out and meet people, credit them and the acknowledgements. So that was really fun. And then I came back to Sydney, so I found another fencing club and kept going. And then I found out about HEMA, which is Historical European Martial Arts, which is basically sword fighting. But they use all like vicious stuff too, like these big long poles and those cudgel things, and across different eras, and there's different specialists. And there happened to be a specialist in English rapier of the period right on my doorstep.
Perfect.
So so I took myself along to classes, and I've had to drift in and out because I was working interstate and doing all sorts of other stuff. But there's such a lovely, welcoming community, really eclectic mix of people, and they've just been really welcoming. And I wanted to know how it felt like. I had to initially know, well, like, how heavy are these things? Is this that a woman could do it? So I did make my heroine tall and strong, because she's been carrying weapons and doing it since she was a kid. And women, I think, were stronger then, because we're fetching and carrying and doing a lot more physical labour than we are now. Yeah. But look, me personally.
And can I just interrupt to say to everybody that Terri is not a tall woman. She's what you would call diminutive. But yes, definitely go you on wielding the sword.
Yeah. So I get clonked on the head a lot, because in HEMA you can clonk you on the head and they chop your neck off, chop your arm off, all that fun stuff. So I just have to go low and cut them off at the knees or sneak in.
I love it. And you had, of course, sword fighting and a sword fighting exhibition at your book launch, which was amazing.
I did, yeah. So that was really fun. Yeah. And some really great photos, and again, so they're just giving community. You wouldn't think. It's really one of those ironies, people that are learning how to basically viciously kill other people using anachronistic weapons are the sweetest, loveliest people.
Never make judgments about people. They are. So Terri, let's go back a little bit. So what year did you write or first start writing The Swordmaster's Daughter?
2019.
2019. Okay, so 3 years ago, going on 4, I guess.
Yeah.
And we've been through kind of your history with writing. You've been writing for a long time. You've done a whole lot of things. You've done a lot of submissions.
Yeah.
What made you make the decision to decide to independently publish the books?
I'd pitched at an RWA conference. What was it? I think so. And one person told me they thought it was a bit too YA. And I took that on board and I realised, actually, no, I just had a few little things to change so that it didn't sound YA. But she wasn't interested. And another person in America, because I thought the market is like Australia, like it's maybe people like it in Australia, but it's a broader market. It's set in England, London in the 1600s. So that is not, oh yes, that'll sell well in Australia. So I knew from a marketer's point of view, if I was a marketer, I'd be going, this better be freaking amazing, or why would we bother? And it's not World War II and it's not Regency. What is it? Who cares? And it's not literary. So I pitched it to an American publisher who was a small publisher, if that makes sense, the largest of the small publishers, a large independent publisher. And she really liked it. And she said, I really like the story, I love the concept. She said, but I just can't bring it to market because all we're selling at the moment is World War II, Regency, a little bit of Scottish.
Right.
So I said, thank you, because that is all I needed to know. That tells me it's not the book, it's the market. And it's just never, plus I knew I had a controversial theme. So for first book, yes, it does deal with sexual assault, but I'll use the R word, but it's very much an anti-rape book. It's about recovery and bringing perpetrators to justice. But I knew because it had the R word, that again is a hard sell. So I thought, no, and I'd also had friends that had traditionally published and independently published. So I knew the pros and cons of both. Yeah. And I thought for this book, this series, and when for indie, a series is better for indie, whereas traditional publishers, they're not so much interested because unless the first book sells really well, they don't want to sell on series. But for an indie, that's how you make better money, is because people buy the first one. If they like it, then they'll buy the rest of the series. So I just, for those reasons, the subject matter, the market, because I wanted to write a series, and I thought, and age, I'm not getting any young. Sometimes you just got to make things happen.
Yeah.
So I thought, I'm making that happen.
So once you made that decision, how did that then impact, I guess, the writing of the series itself? Because you'd already decided at that point it was going to be a series. How did it impact the writing of the books, and then when you would decide to release and all that sort of thing?
Didn't really, because I had two written and I was working on the third. What it did do was hold up me finishing the third. I'm only really getting back into that now because it was such a huge learning curve, because you're learning a whole new job basically, and actually lots of people's job, because you've got to be the person that commissions the cover design, you've got to do your own marketing, I learned to do my own formatting, you've got to do all the timings for editors and uploading it, and learn how Amazon and Kobo and all these platforms work. And so it's huge. So I just started reading because, I'm actually quite good at researching, and I take notes and keep little lists. I'm not super anal about it, but I had little lists, and I had a few little spreadsheets of stuff that I really needed to keep track of, and just worked at it a bit at a time. And you have to be an event planner. So I did have one of my son's girlfriends was going to event manage my launch, and the poor girl got COVID 2 days
before. Right.
So then, I'd done most planning, but anyway, yeah, and catering. I did my own bloody catering. Yeah.
I know you had those gorgeous little book covers made on the cakes.
Yeah, she did. My event manager.
Yeah.
She did organise those. Yeah. So marketing, and she also got. That's what they got me for Christmas.
That's earrings. Right, the beautiful earrings with their gorgeous book cover on. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the meantime, I've been trying to do a bit more on social media, even though I struggled with this whole brand concept. And in the end, I thought, it's just me. That's the brand.
You're the brand. That's right.
I'm a bit mad. I like a bit of fun, bit of serious stuff.
Bit of hula hooping.
That's the brand. Yeah. So I had to work on that, and the whole newsletter thing, and there's so many elements to it. But I think you just got to, like any job or any new thing, I can do this bit, and then I'll add this bit, and then I add this bit, and then I add this bit, and broaden your skill set.
So for anyone out there thinking about it, Terri, about taking the leap into independently publishing, what would be your kind of top bits of advice for them, your top tips?
The homework. There's a lot of advice out there. Learn from the people who have already been doing it well. It can get confusing if you overdo it, but pick a few trusted things. And like I said, do it in chunks. Tackle the bits that you can. If you can afford some things that you really hate doing, outsource them. Like I'm going to outsource my accounting because I hate doing that.
Excellent. Yeah, we're not numbers people.
Because you know why? I hate maths because there's only one answer.
True.
Whereas
I hate maths because I can never get the right answer.
I just hate it because there's one answer. And like they try and teach you to do it this way, and I would do it this way. Yeah, whereas writers, you go, oh, we could do this, we could do that. Be like this multi-channel.
True.
Anyway, that's my theory. So so outsource whatever you can. Make sure, really important, you've got to get a professional and fabulous looking cover. So you need a good cover design, not just off the shelf rubbish. And the fonts are really important too. And you need editing. Yeah. Proper editing.
Yeah, you want it to be as professional as you can get it. Yeah.
And you don't need to pay someone to do the whole lot. There's a really great program now. I've been using Atticus because I'm not an Apple person. And it's actually, there was just one thing that I spent 2 days.
That was for the formatting, wasn't it?
Yeah, for the formatting. And once I figured out this one thing that was driving me crazy, then it's actually pretty simple. So it's worth doing.
Yeah.
Some of that myself. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I was the same because I did mine on vellum and because I've got a Mac, and that was pretty intuitive. And once you've done it once or twice, it's, you know, it does get a lot easier, doesn't it?
Yeah. And then you can make changes off the back or whatever. Whereas if you're paying someone to do it, every time you need a change, you got to pay. And website. That was the other one I was coming to. You need a good website. And I did it and put that off for so long. And then finally I had someone lined up to do it. And then my son said, no, you can't let someone else do it. I'm doing it. So my son's done it for me. So they're the main thing. Yeah. So that you present to the world your product, because basically it's a product. Yes, it's your baby, but it's a product. So you have to, and thinking of it as a product makes it less difficult when you get criticism or people don't like it. And you say, not everybody likes McDonald's, but a heck, a lot of other people do. You know,
that's a great analogy. Yeah, I love that.
Weirdly likes chocolate. That's fine. So if you just think of it, it's a product, then a creative product, but that has taken pieces of your soul sometimes, but still a product.
Correct. So you're working on book number 3 now, Terri. Give us a little insight into your writing process. And I have to say to everybody listening, Terri has done all this while not necessarily holding down a permanent job like for years on end, but very much working outside of writing as well for a lot of this time. So share with us, Terri, how you managed to get the words done and the book finished and the editing and all that sort of thing done, as well as working.
I've actually found that I'm more productive when I do a bit of external work. When I've had periods where I haven't, and I just kind of dither. So I know I need some external structure a little bit, and then you have to be fairly disciplined. I'm also at the stage now where my kids are off my hands. My husband is a great cook. He does all the cooking and shopping, so I'm pretty lucky. But even when the kids were younger, like you just snatches of time when you can. And I just think it's like any big project, you have to just break it down into small chunks. Some people like word count. I find that word count does my head in a bit. I like looking at it at the end, but I find if I try and aim for a certain word count, I get a bit anxious about it. So I'm better off, I just think of it in scenes. This scene, and then I move on to the next scene, and the next scene, and the next scene. And I don't do, I'm not much of a planner, but like I'll stop about a third and then have a think, and then work out the next bit, and then have a think and work out the next bit. I know where I'm going at the end, but everything in between, I've got to figure out as I go along. And I wrote this down because I was at work. I do this training stuff at the moment, and I found about this concept called strategic slacking.
I like the sound of that.
Yes. So where working less makes you achieve more. So how, and then it went into this stuff on your attentional brain networks. But so basically you have 2 attention networks in your brain, and they function like a seesaw. So when one's on, the other's off. When one's up, the other one's down. So I have to read this so I get this right. So there's one focus which is called the positive, and one's called the negative. And the one that's the positive is like much more focused, attending to a task, deliberate attention. And the other one is when you're not paying attention. You might be doing some other mindless task, which is why when writers are walking or in the shower or doing the ironing, or it's your daydreaming state. And people traditionally would see that as wasting time and not doing mind work and productive work. But actually, that is when your brain neurons make connections and when you get inside building. So I sort of find I do need a lot of that daydreaming thinking time to figure stuff out as I go along.
Yeah.
And if I try...
Sorry, that's something that's come up a few times, particularly in the last 12 months, I think, with different authors who I've interviewed, and them saying they've come to this realisation that they need to set aside time. Like Kelly Rimmer, I know, was one. Set aside time for that daydreaming and see it as part of that whole process, not time wasting or procrastinating or whatever.
It can be, but if it's used at a certain point, or you could structure your day. So when I have days when I'm not at work, because I'm doing 4 days a week at the moment, so when I've got home days, I try and make sure at some point you go out, do some writing, and then if I've got to have a think about what comes next, maybe go for a walk or do some housework or something like that. And then so you're breaking up, you're sitting at the computer. So what I'm saying is sitting at the computer for a whole day is not necessarily productive. Yeah, okay.
It's not physically good for you either, is it?
Yeah. I know some writers that can do that and just it falls out of them, but I think they're rare.
Yeah.
And some people dictate, but I just haven't got my head around that yet.
Yeah.
So that's my little bit of wisdom.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So you are working on book number 3. Give us can you give us the little quick rundown on what happens in each of the books? I know that you're still working on 3, but I know you've got a bit of a vague idea of where the story's going.
Okay, so in the first book, Lucinda has a bit of a love interest and who is connected politically to someone who's pretty much a spy master. And I'm not explaining this very well.
That's all right. Don't forget I can edit.
Yeah. No. In the first book, Lucinda and her... I'm much better reading from the script. Lucinda and her Sisters of the Sword, when they discover that several of them have been the victim of the same, what they figure out is probably the same person, they decide to try and find out who it is and bring him to justice. But in the meantime, Lucinda has met this rather handsome young Scotsman whose uncle is politically connected and runs a whole spy network. And those two things collide. The women's hunt for the protagonist, and then when the Robbie, the love interest, Robbie, his sister, unfortunately, becomes one of the victims, and then Lucinda helps out because of her background with her grandmother.
That's right.
So in the first book, their romance is building, but because they come from very different social backgrounds, stratas, I felt like I couldn't, and you see this in historical fiction, it's just not realistic to get them together from the get-go or to have sex from the get-go. That just didn't happen. There were too many reasons that couldn't happen, and I thought it would take me 3 books to develop the romance plot. Turns out I've sped that up a little bit, but I don't want to give away too many spoilers.
No spoilers.
The romance is deepened and developed and very much challenged, again, by circumstances, because at the end of the first book, Lucinda is drawn into this world of spying and has no choice but to become an informant and a spy at Harvard's Fencing Academy. So that's where the second book kicks off, and because she's now meant to be watching things, and because a whole lot of because the background then was the Catholics were very unhappy because they thought with James that the first coming in and his wife maybe having Catholic leanings, that things might be made a bit easier for them, but in fact they were actually made worse. And they were, if they didn't go to church, to Anglican church, they were fined, and the fines got to be really quite punitive because it was a great revenue raiser, wasn't it?
Yes. Funny that.
Yes, funny that. So there are a whole lot of reasons. So the Catholics are very unhappy. So there's a lot of discontent, and there's Catholic swordsmen at her father's fencing academy. So she's basically fine, which is then how she becomes involved in the uncovering of the gunpowder plot.
That's right.
Yes, which was really fun.
Any hints on book 3, or are we keeping that under wraps for now?
3, the next, so that's 1605. 1606, there was this vision. The Queen Anne, who married James I, was from Denmark, and her brother was King of Denmark, King Christian, and he was a massive drinker and womanizer. He kept in his diary a record of what nights he had to be carried to bed because he was too drunk. Yeah, and he had many mistresses and many children, but he had a man of big ideas. He had a big navy, and he was wanting to have 3 crowns because he had 2. He had Denmark and Norway, and he was after Sweden. And so anyway, he came for a visit in 1605, and it was like this debaucherous, drunken festival at different places.
Sounds like a music festival.
Yeah, and at the same time, there's this political background of the king wanting the Scottish Parliament and the UK. It's got a lot of parallels with today. That's what I really love about history. There are all these parallels. The Scots didn't want their Parliament joined the English Parliament. They're happy for their king to be in England, but not their Parliament to be ruled from England. And the king, that's when the Union Jack was developed. He designed the original flag. So he was pushing for Union, and had stuff designed. And then there's a theft that threatens to undermine cordial relations between the Danes, Scots, and the English. And Lucinda is slap bang in the middle of it.
Oh, I love it. I love it. I can't wait to read it. Like anybody listening, there is just the story itself. It's like page turning, Terri. You've just managed to get that knack of injecting it with all that historical detail without overpowering. The story and the characters are just so engaging that it's just wonderful reading. So congratulations, because you've done such an amazing job.
Thank you.
Now, just before we wrap up, we are going to go on in a minute to record the 4 curly questions for the Patreon listeners. But one other thing that I know you've had great success with as an independent author is BookBub. So for anybody who's listening, whether you're trad or indie, can you tell us a little bit about BookBub and how that's worked for you?
BookBub is a site where readers basically can get free books or discounted books. And it was one of the first ones to start up. And for a long time, if you could get a deal on BookBub, then you got huge visibility, basically. But you usually need a couple of books. I've only got 2, so it's not as great, but it's a great way to get you bumped up the charts of basically Amazon, but there's spillover too. And when you're independent, it's all about getting visibility. So first of all, I used a couple of some reviewing sites where you can put your book and people get it for free with the proviso that they review it, but they don't have to give a good review. You know, there's no obligation at all for a good review. They just have to put a review. So that's initially got me going. And then somehow I got a few good reviews and up on Goodreads. And then I just applied for a BookBub, but I was a little bit strategic because to do the US one, it's really expensive, and that's the Holy Grail. And I thought, firstly, they offered me a new release, which is okay, but they're not that great. But then I thought, I'll just go for one. There's one that you can do UK, US, Canada. And it was like half the price. And I thought, I'll do that first. And if that goes well, then I've got a better chance of getting a full-on deal. And I did. And it sent the book to only for a couple of days. We're not broadcasting that.
Take everything you can get.
Number 1 on quite a few charts of
Brilliant.
And number 1 and number 2 and number 5. So this is UK, Canada, Australia. And then, even though it wasn't a deal in the US, because I think people were downloading it, and now they've only been out. First one came out in August, second one came out in November, which is a softer launch, and I've had over 10,000 downloads. So
that's brilliant. Yeah.
I'm pretty happy with that.
No, it's great.
Quite a high percentage might have been giveaways, but it gives you visibility because you're not.
That's right, because the more people that download the book, the higher up the charts it goes, the more people then see it. So it's that circular thing.
We'll show it to people and we'll figure out, these are the people that kind of like it. But I'm not just on Amazon, I'm also on Kobo, and that's just started to kick up a little bit.
Okay.
The Canadians, because I've got a few reviews on Kobo, I saw Canadians seem to like my stuff. Maybe they're like sword fighting more than guns. And Apple Books is the other one that seems to be doing okay too. So yeah.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So that's
congratulations.
It's a site, and you can just go and some people will download it and never read it, but if enough read it, you'll get more and it has this, so they like that, and then they buy your next one,
Yeah.
and they get notified when the next one comes out.
That's right. Yeah. So get ready, everybody, for book number 3. Any idea when that's coming out, Terri? Do we have a date yet, or we just...
No, because again, I was being a bit optimistic because I should have known my process, this stuff. Like, I've got to figure out, because they're kind of mystery. It's not, like, I don't denigrate romance, but romantic plots tend to have a much more definite path, whereas this sort of, I think it's like a double helix plotting.
Okay.
You know, like all these strands going on, and sometimes it just takes me a while. So I was hoping for May, June for the next one.
But it will be this year.
It will definitely be this year. I was hoping for 2 this year, but I'm thinking one, definitely 1.
Yep. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Congratulations. It's been, like, I'm just so excited to be able to let everybody hear your story, Terri, because as I said, I have so much admiration for the way you've hung in there and just powered through, and you've got such an inspiring story, and you're such a fabulous writer. So I know that everybody listening, a lot of people are going to get so much out of this chat. But where can people find you online?
Is any audio producers out there?
Oh, yes, Terri does have books available if any audio book producers are out there and are interested.
You can order through Amazon. I think you can order through Utopia. Don't quote me on that. Certainly you can order hard copies if you want through Amazon, and ebooks pretty much anywhere you get ebooks.
Anyway,
so Amazon, Kobo. Oh, we don't get Barnes & Noble here, but it's on Barnes & Noble. And the library. Is it in the library here? No, I think the libraries have to buy it individually, don't they? Yeah. So that's another thing I haven't explored yet. So like I said, that one thing at a time, that's something for later.
Yeah, it's on the list. It's on the list. And what about on socials, Terri? Where can people find you and your website?
I probably hang out a bit more on Insta for fun stuff and me just being me. And on Facebook, I probably try and be a little bit more authorly. But at both, I'm Terri Green author. Terri with an I, green like the colour.
Yep. Author. And terrigreen.com for your website.
Terrigreen.com. Yeah, if you do .com.au, it'll all redirect there anyway.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Terri. We are about to chat, as I mentioned, for the Patreon peeps. So if anybody would like to hear more from Terri and hear how she's going to attack the 4 curly questions, definitely sign up for Patreon and support the podcast. So thank you, Terri, and congratulations.
I've been very well behaved too, I think.
You have. I'm very impressed.
Maybe 2 fruity birds. Awesome.
Well done. See ya.
Bye.